years ago, we focused a lot on the firewall that protected the business. You made sure it had all these fancy security licenses and other things, was scanning this and that. And then the CEO would take his laptop to his summer house and sit by his pool with all the company data on it. We're like, all right, well, that firewall no longer does any good to him. So how do we fix that? So we really just took our approach from the network being the safe place to every endpoint needing to be safe.
Hi everyone, Jason from Allixo here. Today we have a really awesome show in store for you. We're really excited to have Michael and Stu from E3 Technology out to talk about cybersecurity and risk management and how a small business owner or a small business manager should be thinking about those things. Sam, why don't you go ahead and give us a little bit of your background? This is the first time we've had you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name's Sam Riley. I'm one of the founding two people in Allixo. Jason and I started this after doing a couple other ventures 12 and a half years ago now, which is crazy. It's gone by that fast. Yep. Most of my time here was serving as the senior engineer, basically coming up with the network and server stuff and getting all that implemented. And then in the last couple of years, I've really taken more of a handle on our tool sets, making sure our antivirus solution, which firewalls we're using, all of that is all the correct choice.
Sam's our CTO because he's, essentially really focused on making sure that we are selecting the right technology and the right tools to be using here. But I like to refer to him as our Chuck Norris. When you absolutely need to send someone in who's going to roundhouse kick the problem in the face, you send Sam. Well, we have all kinds of things we can talk about today, and the first one that, of course, always comes to mind is the practical application of cybersecurity, because just about every manager or business owner has had a chance to buy a software subscription of some kind or pay some consultant a fee or any combination of the two to sort of make themselves more secure. But as we've learned, and I think you guys really have helped us understand, security in the end is really a direction that you go. It's not a place that you end up. So how does someone get started going in that direction when they really haven't given it much thought?
Wow, that's a really good question. I think where you'd start is, you have to have a buy-in from management. Is management truly invested in adopting, a security posture? Because ultimately, if they're not, in the long run, you're probably going to fail.
I've found that when management often, this is how it goes down, they get spooked into taking action because often one of their vendors gets compromised and they sort of experience it, on the periphery, or there's a massive cyber attack that's in, national news. And sometimes, sadly, they begin to take it seriously because they do get compromised.
Right.
When someone is beginning the process of investing in a security posture, and when we say security posture, right, we just mean identifying the ways in which you are going to secure your organization. And that usually starts with something like a risk analysis. Is that where you guys would usually want to start somebody to kind of understand what's at stake?
Yeah, we always like to start the discussion by explaining to our clients the difference between compliance and security. Mm-hmm. And what we were just talking about a few minutes ago is kind of more on the compliance side. So everybody has a driver, but then there's also the security side. And the two really need to be melded together, but sometimes they're somewhat diametrically opposed to one another. So we can have a reason to do compliance that maybe doesn't fit exactly with the direction that makes sense for them from the security standpoint. So that's where risk assessment comes into play. So you mentioned the the risk analysis process, and that's always the starting point, is to go through, number one, understand your assets and what threats are posed to those assets.
Really in simple terms, a risk assessment, and this is why it's good for management to start with a risk assessment, is you don't know what you don't know at the start. So I'm a CEO for a small business, right?
Yeah.
I don't know where our assets lie. I don't even know where our sensitive information is. How much exposure do we have to it, right? We're just starting this process.
Yes.
So what's nice about a risk assessment is at the end of the day, you have a report that basically lists your assets. Okay, here's where everything is, okay? Here's the most critical assets, and here's what could happen to your organization if there's a breach to occur. And so then you can put a risk rating to each one of those items. So the beauty of a risk assessment is for management, it's going to be, a way to guide the ship.
Yep.
It's like, okay, we've got a checklist essentially. We need to start going down.
You sort by dollar value in the end and start at the top.
Yeah. What's our biggest risk?
Yep.
It's this. Okay, go fix that. And as a CEO, you can then be involved in the process more and be like, okay, we have to fix this, and we're going to throw money at it. So
I think that's one thing that leaders will often struggle with when it comes to investing in risk management, is just that sense of, this is not going to bring any return to me, or it's just not practical. But I like that idea of starting with the risk assessment. And I know that we did that with you guys, because it essentially establishes that baseline of, okay, what do you know and what do you not know? What is it that you're completely blind to? Because oftentimes as a leader, you'll think you know where everything is and you know what's at stake. But often once your organization begins to grow, you actually do lose touch. I can vouch for that. It's just like, people ask me questions and I'm like, I have no idea actually.
yeah.
So that's helpful. And then I love that idea of classifying things like you were saying, where, what's the likelihood and what's the severity, and let's come up with basically a scoring of each issue so that we can work on the highest impact issues first and then work towards the bottom. And I know that's how we have approached our security posture with you guys. And so that's a very practical way, I think, of helping that leader feel better about making these investments. I'm curious if you guys have any practical stories that can help our listeners really understand what is at stake. Because I think the common assumption, which is not an unreasonable one, is that, well, we're not big enough, or we don't have anything worth stealing. But I think very consistently that's been proven to not be true in the last 5 years in particular.
One of the services that E3 offers is social engineering. And social engineering is a big issue, right? You get organizations that maybe lock down their network. They really have a dialed-in security program, and then one employee, is careless or not trained, potentially, right? Not even necessarily
what is
careless.
social engineering? Because some people might not know that phrase.
So social engineering is essentially testing employees. In simple terms. Just about everybody that's probably listening to this has probably had a phishing email before.
Yep.
Right, where somebody sends you a bogus email, you look at it, it looks like it's legitimate, but really it's somebody that's trying to get some information. Maybe they're asking for credentials, or maybe getting you to click on a link to download a file. So it's spoofing emails, right?
Yeah.
It's phishing. So that's one way. Another is vishing, or phone calls, where employees might be targeted. Maybe somebody might be calling in, pretending to be somebody in IT, and hey,
it happens a
we're
lot
having
now.
a problem updating your computer or whatever.
Pretending to be Microsoft.
Yeah,
I was going to say, we've had a lot of those.
Microsoft. Yeah, I need your password. That sort of thing. And then there can be physical or on-site social engineering, where you might be testing people who are at the front desk. So an example of that, like a real-world example. I was doing a talk at a group a few years ago, and brought in a clip of a social engineering event that we did with one of our clients. And essentially, what happened is one of our staff had called into a teller at a bank, and she was really busy. You could tell she's flustered and understaffed because the person in the drive-through wasn't there. So she's already kind of off guard.
Yep.
And long story short, we did the IT. I'm the person from IT. I need to update your computer. That whole process. Anyway, ultimately, we ended up having access to her computer and seeing everything that she's doing. Oof. So, and that could happen in the real world. So that's why that's a good example of a lot of people they can just look at the technical side of things, but you have to remember your employees to they need to know what's going on as well, because they can be a target.
Well, yeah, even things that don't target specific people. Like if you just act like you know where you're going and you're supposed to be there.
Right.
I have clients, very big, sprawling campuses by a small business standard. And as long as you just wear a nice polo and walk straight to the server room like you're supposed to be there, I'm not walking by people who know me. They don't know who I am. They just don't care. And you can walk all the way to where that stuff is if you have any idea where it is. And I could have walked out with a server. And fortunately, we've been able to work with a lot of those clients to go, hey guys, should lock that server room door at a minimum, and then here's some other things to do. But
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, like Allixo employees always have a badge with them.
Yep.
This is what it looks like, Yep.
Some of the biggest breaches were just done through social engineering. Yep. This is the most advanced attack we've ever seen. Well, somebody sent an email and got your password.
Yep.
One of our clients had this is quite a while ago, but essentially they were spearphished. And so for our listeners, if you don't know what spearphishing is, it's basically when someone is targeting you, very specifically you. Like for some reason, they picked you. The attackers were very clever. They registered a domain, that was one character off the actual of the customers. That was step one. We don't exactly know how they did it, but somehow they got the email signature of the CEO. They probably just pretended to be vendors or other people for, weeks or months until he replied, said, I don't know you, go away. Okay, well now they have his email signature. Yikes.
Yeah.
They have a domain that looks very similar.
Yep.
Yikes. Yep. Up to that point, they had declined enhancing their security posture any further, so the mail system didn't see that email address as something of concern, even though modern mail security does. If an email address looks similar to that of an actual employee, it's going to put a huge red banner in it and say, this is very likely malicious. Anyway, they sent an email that looked like it was from the CEO to the controller, because on the website and in LinkedIn, it said she was the controller. And they have all their vendors and partners on their website as well. So, it looked like it came from the CEO and said, hey, we're going to buy a bunch of B stock from this vendor. The vendor was based in Europe. So, I need you to wire them some money. I'm hopping on a plane. It's not an unusual email to come from this person, because he's always flying around and he will buy B stock to get a better deal when he can. And she did it. And the only reason it didn't actually go through is because the bank has to verify international wires with another executive in the company. And of course, the COO was immensely skeptical. And then we found out what was going on and kind of put a stop to it. But, that was nearly a 6-figure loss, and they likely would have lost all that money.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's such a good reminder that all the digital security in the world won't protect you if you are easily duped.
Social engineering can be prevented. A lot of the attacks can be prevented with just some education.
Yeah.
Just basic principles. If you don't know who the email's from, don't click on links, never give out credentials. Simple things like that can probably, get you 80% of the way there and block a lot of nefarious activities.
So two-factor authentication, generally speaking, there are 3 commonly used factors. So there's something which is a username, password. So that's knowledge that's in your brain. There is something you have, which is like a token. So like the Microsoft Authenticator virtual token, that is something you have. So it resides on your phone, your smartphone, which hopefully you have it in your pocket. And then another factor that we sometimes see is something you are, which is biometric control. So if you've seen like phones that have like the face recognition
or the fingerprint,
or the fingerprint, I personally prefer the fingerprint, but I use both. That is called something you are. Now there is a 4th one that you don't see very often that is commonly referred to as some place you are. So that's going to be geographic based authentication. So if you can show that you're in a specific location with a latitude and longitude.
We use it in a slightly different context with IP location. So we have certain security parameters that can be lessened, not removed, if you are at the corporate office and you can verify via IP that you're there, for example.
Yeah, that's a really good example.
You can see why Stu is better at describing that.
No, that was a great description.
That was the textbook description. Yeah. And I think the common thing that you're seeing now is in two-factor authentication. I mean, I'm seeing it way more than I used to in most accounts that you might have, but it's typically going to be your account and your cell phone. So.
And there's been a lot of discussion recently about using SMS texting. A lot of older applications, when two-factor authentication first came out, people started using SMS texting. And
yeah, they send you the code to verify that you are you.
And that has kind of gone away, or it's going away, because SMS texting is not very secure. It's a plain text protocol, so it is susceptible to many common attacks.
There's actually it's almost terrifying video I remember seeing a couple of years ago. I think it was a DEF CON or Black Hat, but they were basically, these people were just hanging out in the lobby and kind of talking about security, and whoever was interviewing them was like, well, just give me a real example. So I think the way it goes is the gal pulls up like her laptop and she starts playing like baby crying sounds, and I think even like layers in like other noises, and it's up pretty loud, and then she calls and just pretends to be this like really stressed out mom, and her husband is like off the grid right now and she has to get control of the account, and just, I really need this help.
Yeah.
And really playing the emotional card hard, right?
Yeah.
Social engineering.
Yep.
And she did it. And the guy was just stunned, like,
that fast.
because I don't think he quite believed her when she said how easy it is to compromise someone's cell phone. And when you get that cell phone, now you can get their text messages, because if they basically associate that phone number with a new SIM card and they put it in their phone, you're toast. So anytime I have an app that uses a text for that second factor of authentication, I'm just a little leery of it.
Yeah, because there are still a couple big vendors that even we use, but are careful what we do, that still use that. And I kind of every time, like, still guys, really? And so whenever we can, we switch.
I feel like I'm almost spreading the gospel of two-factor authentication now, because when someone asks me just casually, hey, what can I do to make myself more secure? Because invariably people find out what I do for a living, and that's where I always start. Every single app or service you have, spend, even if it takes an entire day, turning on two-factor for everything.
Yep.
When we were designing the modern office, our main get you in the cloud fully offering, that was this consideration that we just kept coming back to, because we have seen client environments that are new to us, that are usually built for convenience, and because of that, the security has suffered. But occasionally we did run into a client that was like ridiculously locked down. There's one in particular that was just almost comical, because everyone hated that part of their job. Anytime they'd interact with the computer system, which was all the time, right? Because work is more and more digital. So we tried to find that balance of those things. Sam, you've really helped design our layered security approach, and you want to just talk about kind of the philosophy behind that, and kind of like how we think about security now.
Sure.
How we've kind of begun to trust the network a lot less in some ways.
Yeah, so kind of building on what you said, years ago, we focused a lot on the firewall that protected the business. You made sure it had all these fancy security licenses and other things, with scanning this and that. And then the CEO would take his laptop to his summer house and sit by his pool with all the company data on it. We're like, all right, well, that firewall no longer does any good to him. So how do we fix that? So we really took our approach from the network being the safe place to every endpoint needing to be safe. So we looked at how their accounts were secured, the software we're running on their computers. So now we have a layered an antivirus product with what's called an ATP, which does more artificial intelligence type scanning of behaviors on the computer, along with a SIM tool that's watching the logs, along with a few other things that prevents administrative task from running that could potentially be the start of a ransomware infection.
What's SIM, by the way? Because I think a lot of people don't know what that is.
Sure. So basically, SIM is not like an antivirus that you're used to, where it's looking for files.
I play SimCity.
Yeah, SimCity, exactly. Yeah. So instead, what it's doing is compiling logs from every single source we can send it. So we will typically send the event logs from your Windows computer, from your antivirus on your computer, from the firewall at the site still, from Office 365 and a few other places, all to one place. And what that lets this company do is look at everything with a big picture and look for a trend. So they can see that, this was an odd IP address in the Netherlands for that guy to log in from after he just logged in on his computer over here from the United States 5 minutes ago. I don't think he could do that. It's called impossible travel. Stu and I recently, he was helping us with a client going through a NIST audit. And we were doing a tabletop exercise at the end where we were going and saying you had ransomware. What do you do? And we were still responding to that just as a hypothetical, it somehow happened. But as part of that, I was able to actually talk them through, well, this happened, this is a good exercise. It would have actually been blocked at this level on the email scanner, this level on the firewall, this level by blocking the admin control, this level by the antivirus, and we would have had the backups in place to prevent any data loss, even had it run. And they're like, oh,
that's great.
Well, that feels good.
Yeah.
Still a good exercise to go through what it would be.
But it also feels good.
Yeah, you're able to show
that.
those layers working in the real world.
So layered security, it sounds really kind of nerdy, but really I think what we mean by layered security is, just like Sam described, you want to have what amounts to different layers of armor around your information and your users, and that often will look like not only having your network protected, but also your devices.
Yep. You have to assume anyone can fail.
That's right.
Because they do. Someone's account gets two-factor turned off accidentally. Real world, that happens.
That happens.
But then so you want another mechanism that is still in place to stop whatever attack could come after that, even if that was happening.
Yeah. So let's talk about a couple more things in the time we have left today. I think it'd be good to touch on what the limitations are of attempting to do everything in-house, especially when you are in that smaller company range that we talked about earlier, sort of that 10 to 150 employee range. Because I think there are some really substantive challenges that come with just trying to do everything in-house that actually end up costing more.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges if you're going to embark on, a security program and manage it internally, if you're going to keep all of your data, if you're a small business and you're going to manage your data yourselves and house everything internally, some of the big challenges there obviously are cost. That's going to be your number one, I would say.
Yeah.
How do you're probably going to have to pay somebody a six-figure salary to manage your security program if your risk is, if you're going to have all of your data internally. And then I think the challenge with that too is, as the security space is a very hot industry, and keeping somebody on staff who's a security specialist, it can be very challenging.
Doesn't it actually have negative unemployment? Like there's actually a significant shortage.
Yeah, there's not enough talent to go around, and anybody who wants a job can definitely get a job. And it used to be, you might have to move, but anymore,
A lot of it's just remote now.
a lot of the work is remote. So
Yeah, a guy I got to know here in town, actually, Skagit Valley, it's a kind of a bedroom community for Seattle, really. He was in the military, ended up going down the cybersecurity path with his degree, and long story short, he's now the chief information security officer of like a Fortune 1000 company.
Wow.
And he still lives here.
Wow.
He did that in 8 years.
Wow.
really nice.
Yeah. So there's definitely this, issue that we have in the industry that drives up the cost. And that means if you want to have someone on staff that's managing your security in particular, that they're going to be really expensive because they can obviously, like Stu was saying, they can work anywhere and easily collect, six-figure salary.
Yeah. And then maintaining them. If you're a smaller organization, yeah. And then keeping them on staff could be the other challenge too. And if they're, oftentimes the smaller organizations, you might have one person that is completely controlling the security program, and how they're managing the risk within the organization.
Sometimes with everything else, they're just the one IT person.
Yeah.
Well, they become a line item on your risk assessment.
Yeah,
Because what happens
there
when
you
he
go.
gets hit by a bus?
Exactly.
You're SOL. There's
Yeah.
no recovery. Or if he wants a raise, it's, let me just turn that encryption key around a little bit, and I need that. And until you give it to me, you already have them there for you.
Exactly.
It's-
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds crazy, but we have
happened.
had former IT guys hold their employer captive.
Wow.
And they always have this twisted justification in their mind, and to them it feels righteous. And, without getting into the details of that,
Sure.
that's a definite real risk in addition to the
Yeah.
cost.
Yeah.
So at the same time, we're big believers in collaborative information security and information, management, where it is really good to have a stakeholder inside.
Yeah.
Like with the Allixo client you met with yesterday, they have a stakeholder inside that company that really has some sense of ownership over their side of things. But I think what often can happen is, people will want to outsource and just not think about it ever again.
The term we use a lot is you can outsource your data, but not your risk. And that's an important concept to have. So I think, you've got two organizations, for example, let's say you've got one group that says, hey, we want to manage security internally. We want to develop a robust security program. Like we had mentioned, there's going to be a lot of expense involved with that. Smaller organizations, that might not be the route they want to go, where they want, they're not sure that they have the money to pay somebody that type of salary. They're not sure if they want to go through the process of trying to maintain that position, which is going to be a challenge.
Yeah.
And they're looking at, okay, well, let's outsource, get a managed service provider to come in here and outsource our data too. So I think the appropriate way to look at that relationship is you still want to maintain responsibility for the security of that data. So what you can do in that environment is, if you're looking for a service provider, you're going to want to make sure that they're having ongoing testing done. And then you're going to want somebody within your organization that is responsible to ensure that your data is secure. So, what could that look like in a practical sense? Well, annually, you'd probably want to see your service provider's audit report, or maybe a summary of the audit report, and ensure that, they're being tested. They're having penetration testing done, vulnerability testing, and so forth.
And it's really uncommon in the smaller IT companies like Allixo and smaller, and even ones much bigger than us, to just not have any kind of real security program in place. And it's horrifying to me. I mean, I've even had arguments with, colleagues and friends at conferences about how can you run a company like this with this much risk? Because it's not just you, it's all your customers too, right?
Yeah.
And not actually have an occasional third-party engagement to validate that you are as secure as you think you are. Because if it's just a notion or a feeling that things are secure because you're smart, man, that's rolling the dice hardcore. I mean, that's putting the whole farm, making an assumption that, the roll is going to go your way. And that's why we actually have our attestation from you guys right on our website. But there's also that conflict of interest thing too, which is why, another recommendation I would make when you're working with third parties is it's actually good to have those things be separate, to have the blue team and the red team, as they're described in the enterprise security world, be two different entities. We can't realistically audit ourselves, right? And so to that end, we probably shouldn't be solely auditing our clients either. I've always been sensitive to conflicts of interest, and so I think that's one really great thing about our partnership. And we've always had you deliver those reports directly to the client, so there's not even an opportunity to affect it if we wanted to. And that's just another observation I'm making kind of out loud here about something that I see commonly when outsourcing is the selected strategy. So let's talk about compliance a little bit, because I think the way I've most consistently surprised customers is letting them know, informing them that they are actually bound to a certain compliance framework and they weren't even aware of it. Have you guys run into that much, where someone just wasn't aware, or are they usually aware of that by the time they're talking to you?
I would say for the most part, they're usually aware of it by the time they're talking to us. So
Okay.
a lot of the groups that we work with are heavily regulated. So, as you know, there's new regulations coming out all the time. So there's different industries that are starting to kind of have their feet held to the fire for best practices for security. But yeah, I would say for the most part, individuals that we're talking to have a sense of the direction that they need to go. They don't know how to get there.
What are some of those new industries that you're seeing beginning to be regulated, or you're hearing rumors? I mean, I know ours is going that way. I wouldn't be surprised if IT at some level to do what we do required a license, just like being an attorney or a CPA did within 2 to 4 years.
I would say the big one right now is organizations that work with the government. And
We run into that too.
Yeah. Stu, you could probably talk about that better than I could. But typically what happens, there's new regulations that come out and they'll want you to meet a certain standard. But the question is how long does it take before there's really teeth on those requirements? So it's kind of evolving.
And that's what's changing right now with the federal government, because CMMC is on the way. And as I understand it, it's no longer going to be just say you're compliant and everything's kosher. What is that going to look like for our listeners that do business with the federal government?
Yeah, I think it's challenging to say for sure because nobody really knows. These are evolving standards as
it's murky right now
as we speak. But I think the vision is that there will be a certification process, an independent certification process. So you would go through the normal process you're doing now with self-certifying, stating, hey, we've gone through this process. You would say that you're ready.
Yeah.
And then whoever you're working with would send an independent auditor in, and they would, give you the gold stamp. And that company, they themselves have to be certified to do
those audits,
to do the reviews.
I think it makes sense in a way that the federal government would eventually get organized to the point where they're not just going to say, okay, we trust you,
right,
because you said you got your business in order. At the same time, I've heard from some individuals that we've talked to about this where they're concerned about the cost, because all it's going to really end up doing is raising the price of the services that the government or the products that the government is buying, because they, of course, are going to have to pass that cost along.
Absolutely.
I think a lot of federal government contractors, just as an observation, they're going to have a lot of work to do to be in compliance with CMMC. And I know one of the nice things about this new approach is that it is not a one-size-fits-all standard, right? I mean, there's going to be sort of tranches of compliance that it's determined sort of what level you have to be compliant with based on what kind of business.
5 tiers in CMMC, if I recall
5
correctly.
tiers.
Yeah.
So the highest tier would probably
it's
be
5.
like you are doing things on behalf of the government that are probably highly secure or confidential. And the lowest tier would be what, you're a vendor of a vendor.
Yeah.
You install the paper towels in a bathroom.
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
And then, of course, I think most vendors are probably going to fall.
There's going to be a lot of 2s
in that
and 3s.
middle.
Yep.
Yeah. So I have one question I always like to ask our guests before we wrap up, because this is the Modern Office Podcast, and we like to talk about, how work is changing and what modern work looks like. So the question is actually really simple. What is a technology that you have seen, observed, read about, heard of, that is coming under development or is here now that you think has the potential to just completely upend work? And particularly things that, aren't maybe like super common knowledge yet. Like, obviously, Zoom and tools like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, of course, have completely changed work and will continue to do so. But what's maybe not on people's radar? And it could be very niche even and maybe only relevant to your industry. But I'm curious, as are, I think, our listeners, what are some of those things that are just on the horizon that are either interesting or cool or fun?
Something I'd like to add to that is, you kind of touched on it. I think we haven't really fully seen the impact of the infrastructure being put in place to do remote work. You know, I mean, so in the past, you know, there were a lot of, you know, your average user wasn't jumping onto Zoom calls on a daily basis or understanding even what the capability is for remote work, even though the technology's been there for, you know, a decade, right? But now I think you have a situation where there are so many people that are set up for that. So I'm just curious to see what impact that's going to have on business moving forward. You know, I don't think we really have seen what, you know, the potential is for that.
Well, especially like immersive meeting technology where maybe there's a three-dimensional element to it, or you wear a Microsoft HoloLens and it looks like they're sitting across the table from you. I mean, the ramifications of that just almost spiral out of control in your head real quick.
Yeah, I think the technology that we're talking about here, there's actually a name for it from the security side. It's called a zero trust architecture. And what that refers to, and I think Sam, you mentioned this earlier when you were talking about the CEO that, you know, takes his laptop and he's using it, you know, on his home wireless. The zero trust architecture is really talking about how do we address those risks, right? So, you know, the old concept is you're in your office, you've got your firewall, you've got your SIM tool. You talked about a SIM tool earlier, Sam. You know, we've got our antivirus. We've got all these different controls, right? And so that laptop is very well protected when they're in that home environment. But that laptop moves, right? It goes to
here and there and everywhere.
It goes to coffee shops. It goes to the home environment, you know, maybe a lake house, whatever the case is, right? So zero trust architecture is just talking about a set of controls that protects our data, our most critical assets, no matter where it's at. And you don't inherently trust based upon this single asset. It's the opposite. You inherently distrust
everything,
every environment that you're in, and make sure that your controls are up to the task of protecting the data.
Absolutely.
I like that way of describing it.
Yeah, and just think about the increased communication that's going on over the internet. You know, maybe corporate meetings are all being done remote now. That used to be closed room situations. I mean, it's
and then Zoom bombing became a thing. Temporarily anyway.
Yeah, and that trend, you know, it's probably just going to continue down that road. So that's a whole host of additional security concerns. It's just higher focus on communication.
I had a customer once ask me about the security within the modern office. You know, they just told me to sort of boil it down to its sort of simplest form. And so I thought about it for a moment, and I just keep coming back to this simple idea. You know, the essence is you should be able to work from anywhere. I mean, as long as you have internet, and your security posture will not dramatically change, if at all. Whether you're on, you know, the open public Wi-Fi in a lobby in a hotel in Nigeria where, you know, cybercrime is rampant, or you are at your house, or you are in your, you know, highly secure corporate office. We want to just assume that basically you're always on public Wi-Fi. That's how we're going to treat your device. And what's really interesting is when you're using the cloud comprehensively, the way that we deploy it now for our clients, there is really no need for necessarily even local communication, you know, except for things like printing.
And
even that is being
even that we can do in the
centralized to the
cloud
cloud.
now.
You know, there's a lot of sort of print brokers now that you send your print job to the cloud and it comes back down, and then it'll fail over locally if it needs to. I mean, it's wild to me that we can have a network very soon that you guys would like run one of your scans on, and it literally just comes back blank.
I'm waiting for that job. I'm waiting for that
There
job.
was actually a recent audit at one of the credit unions. I forget, was I working with one of your other guys? And basically the number of things we had to unlock and change just to enable him to run the scan was like, all right, well, guys, we've had to give you, 30 sets of keys just to get in to do it. You know, at what point are we just, beyond that? But
it's interesting that, the way devices interact with like Wi-Fi, for example, when they're set up the way we're talking about, it's no different. whether you're at your house or your office. The future is here.
Yeah, yeah,
And we're along for the ride, I think.
yeah. It's interesting.
Well, thanks, guys, for joining us. This has
Absolutely.
been a really fun conversation. Looking forward to getting this video out in front of all of our customers and our audience. And we will definitely do this again, whether remote or in person. It's going to happen.
Yeah, it was fun. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jason.
All right.
Thank you, Sam.
Thanks for coming.
We enjoyed being here.
Fantastic. All right, guys. Thanks again.
Absolutely.